Good morning. My name is Grant Swartzwelder, President of OTA Environmental, OTA Compression. And along with PBPA, we appreciate you joining us for the 20th webinar that we've had. We've had a good run with a lot of good speakers from David Hayes at Natural Gas Partners to various congressmen, regulators, head of the EPA District 6, TCEQ, and the Railroad Commission. So the very first event that we had was our own Luis Vasquez, who's the environmental manager for OTA. Had a great response. It was to talk about the changes that were happening within the environmental world, more on a regulatory side, kind of the real kind of granular type. Got great response. Now being 5 months later, we thought it would be great to bring him back on. Any of these events are being videotaped and are on our YouTube channel. Just go onto YouTube and look for OTA Compression. If you want to hear of any of those speakers or see who else we have, we invite you to do so. So with that, let me jump right into with Luis. Fill us in. You know, when we first talked 5 months ago, we were asking what changes to expect, what relief we might get because of COVID and because of the oil price. How has that played out? Have there been any? Are there going to be more? How have the regulatory world responded? Okay, well, first, thank you for having me back. I guess I did something right to make it back on the second round. So back in May, we were talking about, yes, the oil price and then COVID. As far as the oil price, the regulators did not mention that. Now, as far as the COVID-19 public health emergency, EPA, TCEQ, ODQ, NMED also, they mentioned that they were going to be practicing case-by-case enforcement discretion. As an example, they did provide some extensions for certain reporting. For example, the emissions inventory, an extra month was given by TCEQ for that. And then there were, from New Mexico, there was an extension for performance testing, monitoring, record keeping, reporting on a case-by-case basis. It wasn't a suspension of the rules nor an exemption from any of the agency rules, but they understood. And on that, currently, if you plan on sending in any reports to the EPA, and their hard copy, make sure that you also email those to their email. They mentioned to reach them at their contact us page, because of the fact that their people are working remotely these days. They don't have access to the office too often, so it's good to just play it safe and also email them whatever you're going to be sending in hard copy. Is that mainly just to have some type of tangible documentation that you have sent it in, or is that just to help them out, or is that what they're requiring? They're asking for that to be done so that their people can continue their work, having access to whatever reports you're sending in. So I would copy yourself on it. And of course, whenever you're sending any hard copy documents to regulators, make sure you send it certified mail so that you have proof that it was received and whatnot. Now with the COVID, I would assume that a lot of oil companies are working remote, which might cause them, through all that confusion, to miss a deadline or be late on something. Is there anything that various oil companies need to know if they've missed a deadline or they're going to have to file something late? Well, the guidance that's been provided is, of course, entities are expected to act responsibly under these circumstances, you know, to try to minimize the effects and duration of any type of noncompliance caused by COVID-19. Of course, if there's anything that is causing you to have any type of noncompliance or miss any deadlines, make sure that you retain as much documentation, sufficient documentation, to make sure you are able to describe what the noncompliance was, how COVID-19 was the cause of it, and then what actions have you taken in response to the noncompliance.
including, your best efforts to comply and return to full compliance.
Let's go into kind of what you've been seeing lately on the changes in the various regulatory entities. We got Railroad Commission, you've got New Mexico, you got federal, but let's just start with the Railroad Commission. Any updates on what they're up to?
So the most recent, I think it was a week or two ago, the Railroad Commission sent out a notice to operators that they had initially extended certain expirations and filing requirements up until September 30th, 2020. Now it's been extended up to December 31st, 2020. It's going to cover current permits, licenses, registrations, rule exceptions, except for the P5 that's not included. There's more details for the P5 that I would suggest you, if that's applicable to you, make sure you dig into the rule. The extension does not apply to any violations identified as a result of inspections or complaints or of that nature.
How about New Mexico? What are you seeing there?
What New Mexico, they have a regulation that's in draft form. It's out for public comment, and that one's going to be covering venting and flaring. The goal of it is to regulate the venting and flaring of natural gas to, prevent waste and protect rights, and also protect the public health and the environment. It starts off by, the rule prohibits the venting and flaring of natural gas during drilling, completion, or production operations to minimize the waste. But as you dig into the regulation, you have exceptions of when you can. Of course, like for instance, during the drilling operations, they want to make sure you try to reduce your venting. You capture or combust natural gas that's escaping from the well. Last resort, if during a venting, an emergency or a malfunction, they understand you may have to vent it for safety reasons. And then during completion operations, they want to, again, the goal is to reduce venting. During flowback, they want you to capture the liquids, incorporate a separator as soon as technically feasible, and then capture and route any recovered gas to a flow line. As far as the gas, if also to re-inject into the well if you can, or use it on site. Second to last resort is going to be flaring it if you can't, safely do all the above. And then last resort, if you cannot, flare it or do any of the above that I mentioned, then you can vent it. But of course, all over this regulation is going to be the need to measure how much you're venting or flaring, and then to have a record of that amount. So, and that's going to serve later down the line in the regulation, as we'll talk about. During production operations, they want you to not vent or not flare unless, there's an emergency or a malfunction that, you cannot avoid. And it would be safer to either vent or flare than to try to do the other options. The other authorization of when you could flare, possibly vent, is if you have an air permit issued by the New Mexico Environment Department. And that'll include federally enforceable limits on your emissions. Another little portion of the rule also is going to be incorporating audio, visual, and olfactory inspections of the sites. And depending on your throughput or your production levels, will determine what the frequency is. For those that are greater than 10 barrels of oil per day or 60,000 cubic feet of gas per day, it's going to be weekly. For those that are less than that, equal to or less than that, it'll be monthly. And then, of course, like I mentioned, they're going to require the measurement and reporting of the vented or flared gas, regardless of the reason or authorization for the venting or flaring. Go ahead.
Well, you bring up several points there, and I know earlier we had talked about, I think it was Title II, I might be getting that wrong, but where they were having to report when they had venting emissions issues, the volumes, and so they were needing to document that. are you seeing this whole documentation, this data, is that growing, or is that just in New Mexico, or is that hitting throughout? I guess especially on flaring. Is that the right question?
Yes, what I've been seeing, especially in this regulation, it's a lot of record keeping, of course, and this is leading to, you want to measure it and document it and report it, and it's going to be leading to pretty much creating in my opinion, creating a foundation of what is your company, what has it been venting and flaring, and there's already record keeping reporting going on in relation to that. You have greenhouse gas reporting, you have emissions inventory, so it's been there. Now I believe they're focusing a little bit more on the flare and venting portion of it. The other portions of the regulation also is going to require you to have weekly inspections of your flares, and then also record keep or document that you have been completing these weekly inspections. And it also involves retrofitting. If your flare does not have an automatic igniter or continuous pilot, then you're going to have to retrofit it. They give a couple of dates of if you installed it prior to May 31st, 2021, then you're going to have to retrofit it no later than 18 months after the effective date of the rule that's in draft right now. If you installed it after May 31st, 2021, then they must be equipped with it from the get-go. Now, on that, they give you the option of the automatic igniter or continuous pilot. My suggestion would be to go with the continuous pilot, because that, although some states allow you to have the option, when you go into the federal regulations, the option's not there for the automatic igniter. So the continuous pilot is what the federal regulations require. So if you get the continuous pilot, you can knock out two birds with one stone if any of the federal regulations apply to you.
Just clarification, when you're talking about the data and some of the things you just talked about, is that just for the state of New Mexico, which was kind of what we started off on, and then I meandered us over to flaring, or is this a federal, like in Texas and Oklahoma and other places we need to worry about what you just said also, or is this just New Mexico?
Well, as far as the continuous pilot, if you're talking about that.
Continuous pilot, and then also the whole data record keeping and visual inspections.
So the record keeping's always been there. Continuous pilot.
Federal wise.
Federal. Now, as far as the documentation, record keeping, yes, that's there. Now, New Mexico's doing this and focusing a little bit more on the venting and flares portion of it. And that's because beginning January 1st, 2022, operators are going to have to reduce the annual volume of vented and flared natural gas on a statewide basis in order to capture 98% of that natural gas no later than December 31st, 2026. So the documentation, providing the foundation, they're going to use the record keeping. In my opinion, that record keeping is going to be there to provide a foundation to compare on, have you reached, are you close to capturing 98% of that natural gas by this date? So, and then the operators are going to they're going to be required to submit an annual report certifying that their compliance with the statewide gas capture requirement has begun. They're moving towards it, and that reporting or annual certifying is going to begin February 15th, 2022. So we're recording what we're venting and flaring, we're reporting it, and it's all leading to the capturing of 98% or more of natural gas. That's the goal, is go from venting and flaring to capturing and reducing the venting and flaring and making sure that you're capturing up to 90%.
It does seem like with this whole ESG movement that we've seen over the last couple of years, and kind of Environmental Defense Fund and other environmental groups, that flaring really is the hot button area. I know we had the EPA Administrator District 6 talking about them doing flyovers about a month ago there in parts of the Permian Basin. Are you seeing additional scrutiny when it comes to kind of flare operations than we have maybe a year ago or 6 months ago?
Yes, it's been a hot topic, and now it's all about making sure you're, keeping that secondary resort, try to capture better, stop the venting, make sure your flare is working properly, and then with inspecting it, making sure that it's on whenever it's supposed to be on, so it can be doing its operation.
Good. Well, back on the whole regulatory side, we were also we talked New Mexico and Texas, but what about federal? I think there's we were talking about some type of a waste prevention rule.
Yeah, so that's another one that's kind of creeped up lately. It's the 2016 Waste Prevention Production Subject to Royalties and Resource Conservation Rule, also known as the 2016 Methane and Waste Prevention Rule. Now, that one's come to light recently because back in 2016, it was rolled out. 2018, there were some revisions that kind of slightly gutted it from some of the requirements that it had within it. July 15th of this year, U.S. District Judge rescinded those 2018 revisions that had gutted that rule, and now it's back out. And October 13th, it'll come into effect. That 2016 Waste Prevention Rule will come into effect October 13th, 2020, 6 days from now, I think. And along with that, though, it's also, there were some challenges from certain states regarding, the soundness of the rule, possible overreach. So those are also going to come back into play. And what the 2016 Waste Prevention Rule, it applies to all onshore federal and Indian oil and gas leases. And it has two major components. One, the rules governing the royalty use of oil and gas, and then the rules intended to limit the waste of oil and gas, especially the waste through venting, flaring, and leaks. And again, there's the word, and again, the venting, flaring, and of course, when you say leaks, everybody thinks about is LDAR, correct? So wait, there's more. There's gonna be, not only does it, update and codify the NTL 4A, which is the notice to lease and operators of onshore federal leases and Indian oil and gas leases, but it's going to cause operators to have to submit a waste minimization plan every time they submit a permit to drill. You're going to have to be, operators are going to have to capture a certain percentage of the gas they produce. Again, the capturing versus venting and flaring is showing light again. And then the minimization, or you're going to have to minimize your emissions from pneumatic controllers or pneumatic equipment, shall I say, and storage tanks. And then the last portion that I'd like to bring up is the LDAR. Operators are going to have to implement leak detection and repair procedures. And that's for all of the sites that are applicable. And all of the sites, regardless of, like, the Quad OA rule gives you a date and some details related to when your site is affected. From what I've read on this rule, all the sites that are federal or Indian oil and gas leases are going to be applicable to this LDAR. Luckily, if, say, you're applicable to Quad OA and then also the waste prevention rule, if you're compliant with the Quad OA, then you'll be compliant with the BLM rule, the waste prevention rule, from what I've read.
So given that comment there, where will it require more LDAR being done? It sounds like if you're doing LDAR as you should be doing now, then you won't have to do more?
Correct. You won't have to double your programs. They'll allow you to just do one that is equivalent to what's required. This rule kind of mirrors Quad OA, except for the frequency, where if you want, we can cover the frequencies or the updates to.
Yeah, please, because that's kind of changed too, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. So comparing the BLM waste prevention rule to the Quad OA rule, the frequencies for the compressor stations had not been updated on the BLM rule, to my knowledge, after reviewing it. The Quad OA has changed for compressor stations. The survey frequencies of LDAR is changed from quarterly to semi-annual. Other updates for the Quad OA federal regulation is going to be amount of days that you're allowed after the initial, your initial survey to be completed. Say you bring on a well, or you start a compressor. After that new production, first day of new production or the startup, you have 90 days as opposed to what used to be 60 days. So they gave an extra month, 90 days for the first LDAR survey to be completed. And then, like I mentioned, the surveying frequencies for wells, it stays the same, semi-annual. For affected compressor station sites, it went from quarterly to semi-annual. And then as well as another little change or clarification was, if you have a well site, say you have a well site with some process equipment on there, that is, you need to LDAR survey that. If you have a well by itself, you do not need to LDAR survey. If you have a site with the well on it or that process equipment, and you remove everything but the well, then you don't have to continue to survey that as if it were a tank battery site or a well with process equipment. Removing all the equipment, leaving the wellhead by itself, gets you, kind of exempts you from the LDAR survey. Couple more points of what has changed for low producing wells, those that are at 15 or below 15 barrels of oil equivalent. Those are exempt from having to be LDAR'd, but you have to keep track of the average of the production on a rolling 12-month basis. And lastly, the removing of class 1, class 2 wells, and those are the ones that are used at oil field wastewater disposal wells. Those are no longer needing to be LDAR surveyed. And for example, class 2 wells will be your SWDs, those that that you dispose salt water into. But that's there's more updates, of course, to other portions of the rule, but since we have short amount of time, just went through the LDAR portion.
And that is 15 barrels a day production.
Right.
Because so a lot of those wells that were drilled probably after the requirement for LDAR, they probably have declined enough that they might not need to be doing LDAR anymore on those, with the declines that a lot of these unconventional or conventional wells have been having. So that could be a big positive for a lot of folks.
Yep, I would just recommend make sure you keep your records and the rolling on a rolling 12-month average.
Okay. One other thing that we see kind of change from, I didn't mean this to be all flares, but this is very helpful, but talking about one of the other big visible areas that you could end up being on TV or a newspaper with is having to do with spills. And so looking at, to cover yourself from a spill standpoint, I know SPCCs are so important. A lot of people kind of just check the box, but if you get into a spill situation, you better have those set up. Can you bring us up to speed on when those things, what do you need to know about SPCCs, or like when do you have to maybe review them or update them?
So that was a topic back in May as well, because you had companies storing oil on location. And I dug in and reached out to contacts in the different regulatory agencies from the states. And it was, can we store it on site in these temporary storage tanks, these mobile storage tanks? And what I received back was, make sure you have sufficient containment for those storage tanks, meaning you have a berm around it, you generate some containment calculations to make sure that it's covering, if by chance there was a spill, that it would accommodate what you had as far as capacity. And then the other question was, do these temporary storage tanks, are they going to be applicable to quad away? Well, the definition of a mobile storage tank was figured out, or was, if it had wheels, if it had a skid, it was deemed to be a mobile storage tank. And in that case, if it was on site less than 6 months, it wasn't going to be considered a storage tank. So back in May, that was the answer. So if any any individuals in the audience or companies in the audience have had their tanks coming up on 6 months, you might take this into consideration. So after 6 months, the temporary mobile storage tank turns into a storage tank, and you're no longer excluded from, having to determine your potential emissions, determining whether or not you're quad OA affected, having to reduce your emissions of VOCs by 95% if you're over 6 tons per year of VOCs per tank. On the other note, if you do have temporary storage containers, make sure you're keeping, records of your volumes, of the dimensions, capacities, for your tier 2 reporting, your emissions inventory reporting, your air permit deviation reporting. The other question that kind of leans into what you were asking, the SPCC plan, do we need to update it? Do we, if we have temporary storage tanks? No, as long as they're not there longer than 6 months. So that was a long way to answer your question of, do we need to update it?
And I think the key takeaway there is the 6-month window, which probably is hitting about now if anyone has those, put those tanks out when the first kind of crisis hit. What about on the permanent tanks? Because you still require SPCCs if you have a tank battery and tanks there. What do you have to, once you have the SPCC in place, are you done, or do you have to update or modify those?
Well, if you changes to your site, say you add or remove tanks, or if it's what they consider a technical change, then yes, you have to update your SPCC plan, because if you add equipment, your containment may no longer be sufficient for that. So we crunch the numbers, make sure that you have enough containment for what either you've added, or if you bring on new production and new tanks. Or so it's always good to, if there's changes at the site, review your SPCC plan and your air permit for, in that case, to make sure what's in the field is also reflecting what's on paper for both SPCC plans and air permits.
Fantastic. Well, Luis, it is now past 11, so it's past our 30 minutes, but I think this was very helpful. I hope the attendees found it helpful also. If they have any questions, how would they reach out to you to get additional information?
Either they can give me a call at 469-704-4149, or reach out to me via email, lvasquez@otacompression.com.
Fantastic. You can also go on our website and get our email information there, or contact me and I can pass you over to Luis. But thank you, Luis. Thank you, attendees. Appreciate y'all's interest. And as always, hope you found this helpful in some small way to make your business better. Have a great day.